last month, or whenever it was, me and Elise found out that Onision has spent the last year and a bit, or whatever it is, writing a bunch of AI slot books and releasing them on Amazon under a fairly obvious pseudonym of G.J. Jackson. And today I want to talk about these and his new books in general in more detail. I made a slight video last month, just being like, oh, look at these, look at the titles, blah, blah, blah. But today I want to go through them in a little bit more detail. Because some are just stupidly bad. Others are quite revealing about Onision's kind of current mindset and how he feels about a lot of the allegations against him. Since me and her made those videos talking about it though, actually, and it turns out that I think Ainaba also mentioned so he did these AI reworks of his novels, and Ainaba mentioned those. Don't think he found, or to the best of my knowledge, maybe he did, don't think he found the G.J. Jackson books, but since me and Elise mentioned it and were like, hey, we think he's done this, Onision's like wiped his books off Amazon. Like, they're just gone. The G.J. Jackson AI slot books are all gone. The Onision author account is back to just having the original and not the AI enhanced versions of Stones for Abigail and This Is Why I Hate You. He literally just has the 2 original books on there now, and everything else has been deleted, which is interesting, and I kind of want to know why. What prompted that? I don't know. However, I read the books that I want to talk about last month, got all my screenshots that I needed from them and everything like that, and I've just been able to write my script now. So let's talk about them, because even though Onision tried to wipe them from the internet, I still have things I want to say. We're going to look at 3 of his books today. Falsely Accused, Victims of Cancel Culture, #MeToo Abuse, and Vexatious Litigation, which he did release under the Onision name, but is clearly 99% AI nonsense with his own agenda thrown in there, and there's a lot we can read into that about how he clearly feels about the allegations against him. There's also Poems of Onision's Pain, which is a pathetically childish attempt at a bunch of acrostic poems that just, oh my god, the humour is so juvenile, it's not even funny in a cringy way, it's just like, why are you doing this? Why are you wasting your time? Why are you wasting my time? What's the point? And we have one of his AI slop attempts at non-fiction, which was written under the G.J. Jackson name, which is called Sex Ed for Doms, which I'm only going to talk about briefly, because I'll be honest, for AI nonsense, it's not that bad. There's not a lot of harmful stuff in there, but there is some stuff that is like super ironic coming from Onision after all he's been accused of. So we're actually going to start with this one, Sex Ed for Doms. The cover is very clearly AI. Like, we can all agree this, right? This is an AI cover. Like, everything about it screams AI. This is subtitled What No One Taught You About Dominance, and also subtitled The Science, Psychology, and Ethics of Power, Desire, and Control. So yeah, we're judging the use of AI right off the bat, right? Yeah, good. Okay, we're on the same page. Also, apologies if I sound rough today. I'm just getting over a cold and I lost my voice the last couple of days, so I'm still a little croaky, but we're working through this. Thank you for your patience. So he builds this book on the idea that it's full of heavy academic research, and he does provide some sources for some of the claims he makes, not all of them, and also they're not really sourced well, okay, I don't know what sourcing system he's using, but it's not like a fully accurate one like the Harvard referencing system, for example. So like, he doesn't provide any dates or extra information. He definitely doesn't provide like page information on where he got it from, so it's a little bit hard to track down some of the claims he was making, but I did for a few, and little iffy in places, right? So, for example, in the introduction to the book, this is the very first thing we get. Research published in Pediatrics documented something that should have caused a national conversation and instead barely registered. The American film rating system, studied across decades by researchers from the Harvard School of Public Health, has grown increasingly lenient about violent content in movies while remaining comparatively tighter about sexual content. Films that once earned R ratings for violence were being assigned PG-13. The reverse had not happened with sex. The creep only went in one direction. No one was particularly alarmed. This one did provide a year, actually. A lot of his other references don't. But I looked up this paper, and his conclusion isn't entirely accurate. His conclusion is a big over-exaggeration. The actual conclusion from that paper was that in all categories, and I quote, the MPAA, who are the board who assign the ratings, essentially, applied less stringency in its age-based ratings over time for the period of 1992 to 2003. And their conclusion was, and again I quote, Parents and physicians should be aware that movies with the same rating can differ significantly in the amount and types of potentially objectionable content. Age-based ratings alone do not provide good information about the depiction of violence, sex, profanity, and other content, and the criteria for movie ratings became less stringent over the last decade. The MPAA rating reasons provide important information about content, but they do not identify all types of content found in films, and they may particularly miss depiction of substances, which is fair and useful to know, absolutely. However, Onision's takeaway and conclusion to all this is extreme violence is now normalized in kids' films, so why isn't sexual content? He thinks it is stupid that if kids can see violence, they're still shielded from seeing sexually explicit content. He thinks kids should be allowed to see that, I guess. I'm not even joking. It's ridiculous. His opening argument in a book about BDSM is, why aren't we showing more sexual content for kids? What the hell? He goes on to say, the idea that children should be shielded from the image of two adults expressing physical desire while being freely admitted to cinematic torture sequences is not actually a fringe position in this culture. It is the default. It is the air. We have spent so long inside the logic that we forgot to notice how broken it is. A man gets his skull caved in on screen and we give it a wide release. Two adults whisper honestly to each other about what they want in bed, and suddenly we need a conversation about appropriate content. We built entertainment empires on simulated slaughter. We handed our children vivid, lovingly produced imagery of human suffering packaged as heroism, and then turned around and treated the existence of consensual adult desire like a threat to civilization. That is not a value system, that is a disorder. Now, I'm all for providing young people with age-appropriate sex education, but it needs to come from properly trained and vetted educators, not soft porn films. Am I wrong? I personally don't think a discussion on showing kids sexual content and how explicit it should be to show kids that, I don't think that's the best way to open up a supposed sex education book for adults. And it's definitely not helping Onision debunk the grooming allegations when he's talking about it like this. But I'll let you guys make up your own mind about that. The next part, though, is something which, even though it's AI slop, I do think is useful, and it's about the importance of consent. He, or the AI, writes, more plainly, nothing in these pages is a license to override another person's autonomy. Consent is not a technicality, it is the entire foundation. It is ongoing and active and revocable at any moment by anyone with the full capacity to give it. Anyone who reads this looking for permission to ignore reluctance, pressure someone into compliance, or dress up coercion in the language of dominance has misread the material catastrophically. Power exchange between adults requires that both people can actually exercise power, including the power to stop. Anything less is not a dynamic, it is an imbalance. This book will not help you build an imbalance. I absolutely agree. 100% love this. It's great. He actually has a whole chapter on this later on, titled Consent Negotiation and the Difference Between Hot and Stupid. In it, he writes things like, consent is not a checkbox at the beginning of the night that provides retroactive coverage for everything that follows. Rain's current consent guidance states it plainly. Consent should be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. And again, this all sounds brilliant. All stuff I thoroughly agree with. It's just ironic it's coming from Onision, isn't it? You know what I mean? The enthusiastic part gets the most resistance, usually from people who find it easier to work with silence than clarity. Silence is not self-explanatory. Freezing is not a form of participation. A person who goes still, goes quiet, or begins to manage their breathing carefully in the specific way people manage it when they are enduring rather than enjoying is not broadcasting a green light. Rain explicitly notes that partners should not interpret silence or the absence of resistance as consent. The onus on verification sits with the person initiating each escalation, not with the person who has not yet found the words to refuse. Coercion in intimate context does not usually arrive with a label. It arrives wearing the costume of persistence, charm, injured feelings, rhetorical pressure, and the specific manipulation of framing a partner's hesitation as a personal betrayal or character failure. It sounds like, I thought you trusted me. It sounds like a real submissive would let me. It sounds like It sounds like extended silence that communicates disappointment until the other person backs down from their own stated limit to repair the mood. It sounds like revisiting a declined request enough times in enough different forms that the cumulative pressure eventually produces compliance. The compliance produced by this process is not consent. It is the result of a person being made to understand that maintaining their boundary has a cost they are not permitted to afford. Again, all great, all completely ironic coming from a man who's been repeatedly accused of manipulating, coercing, and grooming a large number of past partners. Remember when he allegedly told the 14-year-old that him and his spouse allegedly groomed that she needed to shave her head and be tied up in the basement and submit to a whole other acts that Onision took pleasure in sexually, allegedly, if she wanted to continue living with them. I would call that coercion. Remember all the accusations of him, allegedly, wearing women down slowly over time through persistence and charm? It makes reading this stuff from him difficult to stomach, doesn't it, when you know he has allegedly done that stuff. And then, of course, there's the underlying misogyny to it all, where he thinks dominant partners can only be, or primarily be, men, and all submissive partners will be women in his eyes. Now, who is this actually for? It is for the dominant partner, which in most practical contexts mean men trying to understand women. That is the demographic most consistently asking for education and most consistently receiving none. The book leans into that framing without apology because pretending to address everyone equally would serve no one specifically. Yeah, this just feels like he's talking about his personal experiences and he hasn't actually listened to the BDSM community as a whole, because there are just as many people in dom sub relationships that are same sex or non-binary or have women as the dominant ones, or all kinds of different dynamics. This just feels like such an outdated and misogynistic assumption, and it continues throughout the whole book. Finally and laughably, I just want to touch on this passage from back in the introduction too. What there will not be in this book is condescension, moral grandstanding, or the kind of soft, hedged prose that refuses to say what it means because it is more concerned with its own reputation than with your actual understanding. You are an adult. You picked up a book called What This One Is. You picked up a book called What This One Is. I love that. You know what you signed up for. And again, this is kind of hilarious considering Onision built his whole career on condescending to kids, judging kids, moral grandstanding about everything from atheism to veganism to kids, and more. It's hilarious. I love that. But that's pretty much all I want to say about this book. We're going to move on to Falsely Accused, but first I just want to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion, if that's okay, because I just want to say if you are enjoying this video and others like it from me, then it would be really, really great if you want to subscribe to my channel, or check you're still subscribed if you've been around for a while. You can really help me by sharing this video around on social media if you do like it and you want other people to see it, or you can help by becoming a supporter over on Patreon, where I've recently been releasing loads of extra content, so I've got some extra videos over there, and I've got some more coming out soon. I've got some bonus videos for the Alchemized video that I'm working on that are going over on Patreon as well. I've got a blog post that I've just written about kind of like struggling with creativity and when you don't feel like your work's good enough in the context of photography, and I also post a lot of photos over there that I take in my personal life. And at the higher tiers on Patreon, you get exclusive stickers and prints sent out to you every 3 months, which is really fun. And it's all stuff designed by me, or photographs by me, or art by me, and all sorts. So yeah, if you'd like to support my channel and my work, you can do that over there. That would be really amazing of you, but also no pressure at all. You can also support me by just watching my videos, sharing them around, and leaving a like if you like this. But anyway, thank you. That's the self-promotion out the way, because I always forget to do it. Let's move on to Falsely Accused. Oh my gosh, right. So while these books are AI rubbish, a lot of Onision still comes through in this one in particular, in terms of like what he's directed the AI to write about. And it's kind of hilarious in some cases. In this book, it's a little bit terrifying, right? So this is the book that I have the most to say about. This is the one we're going into the most detail with, so buckle in here, right? From the very first page, the very first paragraph of the introduction, he does that thing that I see a lot of men online do, and he completely misinterprets and misrepresents the idea of innocent until proven guilty. What we all know this means in practice is the idea that you cannot be legally punished for something until you've either confessed and pleaded guilty, or had a trial, faced a jury of your peers who have decided you are guilty. At that point, you get the legal guilty verdict and you are legally punished accordingly. There's a little more nuance to it than that, but that's about it, right? Innocent and guilty are legal verdicts that have no bearing on objective reality. Whether you are found innocent or guilty or not does not determine whether you have objectively committed a crime or not. It can be the other way around, in that whether you have objectively committed a crime or not can influence whether you are found legally guilty or not. But then, of course, there are flaws in that system, with innocent people being wrongly found guilty and guilty people being wrongly found innocent. But just because you have an innocent or guilty verdict placed on you, that doesn't mean you did or did not commit the crime. Your act of committing the crime is an objective fact in the past that whatever label is applied to you now cannot change. Even if you have an innocent label applied to you, you may have still committed the crime. Even if you have a guilty label applied to you, you may have still not committed the crime. So objective fact and legal labels and definitions are, we would hope, linked, but they don't necessarily have to be the same thing. Do you know what I mean? So to give you an example, growing up in Barnsley, as I did in Penistone, well, I grew up in Penistone. We went out in Barnsley a lot. We would often go to pubs and clubs and bars when we were underage, right? It was normal around here. I think I went to my first club when I was like 16 or something. And therefore, I have objectively committed a number of crimes in buying alcohol underage. The bartenders who served me committed a number of crimes by serving me alcohol while I was underage without ID. They are crimes that have been objectively committed. However, because I was never caught by police and neither were the people who served me, we are by legal definition not guilty of those crimes. There's no guilty verdict there. Like, we haven't had a legal punishment. There's not even been like a trial or an investigation, you know? But just because we haven't been found guilty in a court of law, that doesn't mean those crimes didn't take place. It just means I can't be legally punished for them. And they can't be legally punished for them either. Objectively, those crimes still happened. Onision, like a lot of men online, seem to believe if a person has not been found guilty in a court of law, then the crime cannot possibly have taken place, which is just completely untrue. But for people like Onision, the objective facts around a person's actions and how they've affected other people don't actually matter. All they care about is falling back on, but by the legal definition, and it annoys me to no end. It really does. This is, like I say, apparent throughout the introduction to this book. Every negative claim about any person should be understood as alleged unless a court has established otherwise in the verifiable public record, and even then, courts resolve narrow legal questions, not the full moral landscape of human life. This disclaimer is not decorative. It is not here to make lawyers comfortable or to pad the opening pages with procedural furniture. It is the intellectual foundation the entire rest of this book is built on. If the distinction between allegation and proof already strikes you as a tedious formality, the pages ahead are going to be deeply uncomfortable. That discomfort is not accidental. It is the point. Like, sure, legally, claims might be alleged, and we as outsiders may not be able to say for certain whether something did or did not happen, but objectively, regardless of definitions, something either did or did not happen. Like, you can't change that if it's already happened. Like, objectively, it either did or did not. Do you know what I mean? Just because something is only alleged, this doesn't mean it's not true. A claim doesn't only become true if a legal definition is attached to it. It was true long before it got that label. And this is something Onision conveniently and repeatedly forgets or tries to cover up. Either a person is guilty or not. They have committed that crime or they have not. And you can't change that fact. It either is or isn't. Whether we apply a guilty or innocent verdict to it doesn't change that. It might change how we perceive someone, how we punish someone. It changes what happens going forward, but it doesn't change whether it actually happened or not. Do you know what I mean? So even if someone makes a claim, it's like, oh, it's just alleged, and we can't know for sure whether it happened or not, it still either did or didn't. Does that make sense? Of course it makes sense. You guys are smart, unlike Onision. Interestingly, though, as well as not caring for a moment about objective facts, it seems Onision doesn't even really care for legal definitions that much either. He says, conviction is not evidence. Volume is not verification. The sincerity with which someone believes a thing is not itself proof that the thing is true. True enough, but there is generally a correlation to suggest that if a number of people are all saying the same thing and they all believe it to be true, it is more than likely true. Not always, but more likely. If a person has been convicted, it's more likely that they are actually guilty, with a handful of exceptions. There are exceptions in regards to certain specific crimes and, in particular, racial-based prejudices within the justice system, which I've spoken about before, and I've got a clip coming up that touches on it briefly. But what I will say is this, and this is something I've asked men before when I was speaking specifically about the Jack Denmo or Jack Densmore case. So many men say they believe in innocent until proven guilty, and that they want to believe people who've been accused of crimes, in particular sex crimes, they want to believe they're innocent until a court decides otherwise. But then if they are found guilty, so many of them still turn around and say, well, conviction isn't evidence. People get it wrong. A guilty verdict doesn't actually mean you're guilty. Still doesn't mean you actually did it. And so to those people I ask, like, what would it take for you to actually believe a victim of a sex crime? Like, if evidence isn't enough, if a conviction isn't enough, if testimony isn't enough, what would it take for you to fully understand that someone actually committed that crime? What would it take for you to believe the victims? So many of them turn around and say, well, evidence, of course, but then none of them can explain to me what evidence would be good enough for them. You bring up evidence that was provided in courts and say, well, the court saw this and the court saw this and the courts decided this was good enough. They're like, well, it's not because blah, 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 blah. It's ridiculous. Ultimately, men like this and men like Onision will do anything but face the truth and objective reality about sex crimes in particular, and it's gross as hell. This bit is funny, though. This is not a political document. It is not a vehicle for partisan score settling or a manifesto dressed in careful language. It is not a shield for actual predators, manipulators, genuine abusers, or anyone who harmed another person and is now shopping for intellectual cover to rebrand themselves as a victim. This coming from Onision. If you hurt someone and you are hoping this book will help you dress that up in philosophical language, close the cover. There is nothing here for you. The people this book protects are not the guilty variety with good attorneys. They are the ones the system was designed to protect and systematically failed. Again, so funny coming from Onision. This book will not cover anonymous internet accusations that never matured into anything verifiable. It will not analyse ongoing investigations that lack any court determination. Again, he's talking about himself, right? Every generation looks back at the previous ones and shakes its head at their barbarism. Barbarism, I found that hard to say for some reason. The witch trials, the Inquisition, show trials in authoritarian states. I can't speak today, I'm sorry. Communities that destroyed their own members on nothing but rumour, fear, and social pressure. Greg, please. People and children coming forward about you abusing them is not even close to being comparable to the horrors of something like the witch trials. Like, I know he says he's not specifically talking about himself, but clearly it's underpinning this whole book, isn't it? It absolutely is. And I just find his victim complex in all this is kind of laughable, right? It is. He goes on to say of people who've been accused, you are not required to perform dignity after a public destruction for the comfort of the audience that did nothing to prevent it. You are not required to find the growth narrative buried inside the wreckage and present it gracefully as proof that you are fine now. That particular brand of BS is one this book has no patience for, and it will not appear again. And I will say, one thing we can give credit for here is that he really does believe this himself, as following the allegations against him, he has absolutely displayed no dignity or growth in the past few years, so he's definitely practicing what he preaches. Then there's more, oh, woe is me, I'm the real victim here nonsense, as he says of himself writing this book, and by writing I mean plugging prompts into AI and publishing the crap it comes out with. This book was not written from a comfortable remove. It was not assembled by someone who found this subject intellectually interesting from a safe intellectual distance and decided to document it from above. It was written from inside a real awareness of what it costs when accusation travels faster than truth. When institutions built to protect the vulnerable become instruments of additional harm, and when the gap between what actually happened and what everyone believes happened grows wide enough to swallow a person whole. That awareness is not a credential or a claim to victimhood, it is a motivation, and motivations deserve to be stated directly rather than buried in the subtext of a book asking you to take honesty seriously. Oh, no one cares, Greg. And seriously, there's so much subtext to this book anyway. You say there's not, it's there. Like, so much of this stuff is just him talking about himself and, like, trying to, like, give himself a defense for all this stuff. Like, wait till we get to the bit about, like, kids and grooming. It is grim as hell. So chapter 1 is just a bunch of, like, here's some stories from history of people being falsely accused of stuff. He starts with he starts with Bible stories. He goes on to talk about Salem witch trials. And while it absolutely misses the point in a lot of cases, he is pretty accurate in other places, so that's fine. Mostly it's just boring though. Look at every story in this chapter and the same 3 conditions appear without exception across every era, every culture, every ideological and geographical context. There is something worth gaining: sexual revenge, political removal, property status, institutional self-preservation, social purification, financial settlement. There is a target prominent enough or vulnerable enough to be worth the expenditure, and there is an audience that prefers the emotional comfort of a coherent story over the demanding work of sustained doubt. Remove any one of these 3 conditions and the machine stalls. All 3 together and it runs beautifully. Fair enough point, I guess. However, let's remember this is Onision saying this in an attempt to draw parallels with his own supposed innocence, and yet we have to remember that all of his accusers had absolutely nothing to gain except wanting to get away from him and warn others about him. He's like, so like his implication here is like, they're just doing it for status and revenge. No, they're doing it because they were scared of you, they want to get away from you, and they want to warn others to not fall for the same, like, manipulation and coercion. That's it. In the next chapter, he says, you cannot build a functioning society on a foundation where reputation can be torched by anyone with a grudge and no accountability. Eventually, the chaos becomes unmanageable. And I agree. And this is why we have legal procedures in place. This is why people ask for evidence before they believe something. This is why so many of us believe Greg's victims, because they have actually provided the evidence, because we've all seen the videos of him abusing certain partners or manipulating, coercing, being angry. We've all seen the texts and the emails and the lists of things, the contracts he wrote out. We've all seen that stuff. This is not just someone with a grudge and no accountability. This is multiple people who've come forward with a hell of a lot of evidence, and that's why we believe them. For him to try and downplay his own situation in this way is laughable. The comfortable public fantasy is that false accusers are rare and exceptional, deranged outliers who can be spotted from a distance. The reality is substantially more unsettling. They are usually people who looked at a situation and found an available option and took it. The engine running underneath most of them is not some rare psychopathy. It is the same engine running underneath most human decisions. Incentive, status, fear. They need to control a story before someone else tells it first. Does anyone else feel like Onision is just projecting here a bit? Like, sorry, but false accusations, especially around sex crimes, are in fact incredibly rare. I've covered it a number of times in videos, but a man is statistically far more likely to be a victim of a sex crime than be falsely accused of committing one. That's what we should be worrying about. That's what we should be concerned with. That's what we should be fighting against. Men being sexually assaulted. Because false accusations against men are so rare. And just because this is how Greg operates and goes about his life with this mindset of needing to control the story before someone else tells it first, while running on fear and projecting his status, to quote his own words back to him, that doesn't mean everyone's like that. That doesn't mean everyone lives their life that way. Most people aren't worried about getting their side out there first because they have nothing to hide and they know the truth is on their side. So whether they say it now or later, it's still the truth. You know? He goes on to talk about why he believes people make false accusations, and it's very clear to me that the majority of things listed here are attempts on his part to discredit his own alleged victims, and that really bothers me. 6 core motivations show up in the documented literature on false accusation with enough consistency to be treated as a taxonomy rather than a guess. Financial gain, revenge for rejection or perceived betrayal, attention and social status elevation, sincere delusion or the gradual distortion of memory under pressure, ideological conviction that the target deserves punishment independent of factual guilt, and the strategic removal of a rival, ex-partner, or obstacle. These categories overlap, and that overlap is where the real danger lives. We've all seen his nonsense before, where he's tried to make up excuses for his behaviour, and tell people that he believes his exes are making stuff up out of revenge, or because he rejected them, and not because he genuinely groomed and or abused them, allegedly. Sorry, gotta say it. Legally, gotta say it. We've all seen him claim they're just doing it for status or money or nonsense like that, and we all know it's complete rubbish. There is no status that comes with being a victim of a sex crime. There's only shame, scrutiny, and cruelty directed at you, and it annoys the hell out of me when people can't see that. It annoys the hell out of me that Greg can't see that. No one wants to be the victim of a crime, and the only thing worse for many than being the victim is having to acknowledge it publicly and face the very high risk of being publicly re-victimized all over again. But Onision is actually delusional. Listen to this. When revenge is rewarded with sympathy, sympathy brings status, status brings social leverage, leverage creates financial pressure, and the story becomes grafted onto the accuser's identity, the narrative calcifies. At that point, recanting is not experienced as correcting an error, it is experienced as self-annihilation. Identity does not offer refunds. And like, are you actually kidding me? Really? Most victims who speak up do not get met with a blanket of sympathy, status, and money. Not even close. And people don't go around not recanting just because they don't want to expose a lie. A lot of people, in fact, do recant because telling the truth is damn hard and they have too much pressure on them, even when what they've said is 100% the truth. I feel like Onision has never actually bothered to listen to the real lived experiences of victims or survivors even once in his life, and it shows. There's more nonsense from him about how when a person gets dumped, the bad ones always lie about their exes out of a need for revenge. Again, in the context of what we know about Onision and the people who've accused him of heinous behaviour, this is really gross of him to say, right? He then goes on to quote and discuss a frequently debunked study on false allegations. This is what Onision writes. In Eugene Cannon's 1994 study conducted over a 9-year period using official police records from a single Midwestern department, revenge was one of the primary stated motivations when complainants ultimately admitted to fabricating reported assaults. The study found that 41% of cases in that sample were ultimately classified as false based on recantations or indisputable contradictory evidence, and revenge, alibi construction, and sympathy seeking appeared repeatedly as the reasoning given. And the thing is, he does acknowledge that this study had a lot of flaws. The number has been contested, studied, misquoted, and weaponized in roughly equal measure since it was published. The criticisms are legitimate as far as they go. Cannon used a single small jurisdiction, relied heavily on police classification, and could not fully account for pressure-induced false recantations. Critics were right to push back on sweeping generalizations. They were not right to treat the mere existence of those motivations as hostile fiction. But then he ignores all that by saying, dozens of subsequent studies using different methodologies have continued to find false allegations at rates ranging from roughly 2 to 10% of reported sexual assault cases in better controlled samples and higher in studies with broader crime categories or by different classification standards. you do realize that 2% is very different to 41%, right? So you can't be like, yeah, but other studies have found the same thing. 2%. No. And even that 2% is heavily contested. So he doesn't mention that some of those studies have flaws too. And even when you take into account that it could be 2%, it's actually thought to be a lot lower because that's only looking at cases that have been reported to the police. It's not looking at cases that go unreported. So I spoke about this in more context in one of my older videos. I believe it was the one on Jack Densmore. So I just like to play you a couple of short clips from that for context because I'm better spoken there than I am today and my throat hurts. Sorry.
He brings up things like false rape claims, like it's some sort of pressing problem. It's not. Again, we'll talk about this more in my video series, but did you know that in the UK, a man is 230 times more likely to be raped himself than be falsely accused of rape? The number of actual false allegations is so low. And as for the likelihood of a woman being assaulted versus making a false accusation, oh my god, the number is astronomical. It's ridiculous. I think men like Myron seem to think if there was no conviction then nothing happened and should forge claim, but that is absolute crap and that's not the case at all. Because of men like Myron and the overall stigma around rape, and because, and you know he doesn't like this word, because of rape culture, because it is a thing and it has consequences, so many women are too afraid or ashamed to ever report their rapes or assaults at all, not to mention the process of having to relive your trauma over and over and over while providing evidence is impossible for so many. And even when they do report it and do press charges, convictions are so hard to get because, again, no one really takes the crime seriously. It's always undermined and underplayed. There is so much victim blaming. It's hard to get hard evidence and a whole bunch of other reasons I don't have time to cover right now. But the point is, just because someone isn't convicted for a rape or assault, that doesn't make it a false accusation. Not by a long shot. So we were talking earlier about how so many people seem to think that false rape accusations are super common and doubt every victim and survivor's story. And I think a big part of that comes down to the fact that rape is a crime which is very difficult to convict, which honestly makes any guilty verdict, including a certain one we've been talking about in this video, even more shocking and believable to me. And for some reason, people seem to equate a not guilty verdict with a, oh, the victim must have been making it up, which could not be further from the truth. Just because there's no conviction, that doesn't mean a crime didn't happen. However, in this case, there was a conviction, but that's not the point. I said in a recent video, and I'll say it again, just because someone wasn't convicted, that doesn't mean they're innocent. Now, do false accusations exist in pretty much every single area of crime? Yes, of course. It's sadly just a fact of life that people will lie. However, they are the minority and they're not as common as people think. Especially when it comes to rape accusations, for example. I've broken down the stats before in previous videos, but a man is far more likely to be raped by another man than falsely accused of rape by a woman, but no one ever wants to talk about that. So many men feel the need to strongly focus on false rape accusations because they want to cast doubt on the validity of real accusations too, because it benefits them to live in a society where sexual violence against women is not taken seriously or believed. Kate Harding suggests that based on the best data available, we can assume that somewhere between 92 and 98% of the time, a person reporting a rape is telling the truth. And so when people entirely focus on false accusations, you're ignoring the much bigger problem and punishing the 98% for the actions of maybe the 2%. Well, actually, even more than that, because only about half of rape accusations, if not less, are reported. Therefore, if 2% of reports are fake, that means 98% of the others are real, plus another, 50% of people who've been... Basically, what I'm saying is, that means over 100 times as many women are being raped as making false rape accusations. Maybe more. I don't... hang on, I'm bad with percentages. Tell me what that is in the comments, I can't think off the top of my head. Yet people still don't want to believe women, and it's frustrating as hell. The bigger problem here is violence against women, and sexual violence against women, and it not being taken seriously. There are always going to be bad actors out there, but you can't punish actual victims who are the majority because of the actions of a few outliers. Kate Harding also points out a majorly flawed study that men's rights activists often like to quote on this topic. So she writes that Take one of men's rights movement's favourite citations, for example, a 1994 study by Eugene Cannon of 104 sexual assault complaints made to a single police department in the Midwest. Of those, Cannon declared 41% were false. However, a critique from 2007 rightly pointed out that Cannon describes no effort to systemize his own evaluation of the police reports. For example, by listing details or facts that he used to evaluate the criteria used by police to draw their conclusions. Nor does Cannon describe any effort to compare his evaluation to those reports to that of second independent research, providing a reliability analysis. This violates a cardinal rule of science, a rule designed to ensure that observations are not simply the reflection of the bias of the observer. And so, as Kate summarized about this case, all the Cannon study teaches us is that the detectives in one police department in one Midwestern town believed fewer than 60% of the people who reported rapes to them, and there are a lot of reasons why that might be. That Cannon, the researcher, also just made up his own mind based on gut instinct. Oh, don't believe that one. Do believe that one. There was no system to it. It's not in any way a valid study, and we cannot extrapolate from that data. It is so entirely flawed. One of the many reasons that certain stories were believed to be false accusations was pointed out in a study by Lonsway, Archambault, and Lissac, and they pointed out that many victims will recant when faced with apparent skepticism on the part of the investigator and the intimidating prospect of having to take a polygraph examination. Yet such a recantation does not necessarily mean that the original report was false. It will probably, however, lead to police unfounding the original report. We also have to consider the fact that a man falsely accused of rape isn't always falsely accused because the woman is lying. In a lot of cases of false accusation if you will, the woman was actually raped and assaulted. There was a rape and assault, but the police investigate and find the wrong person, usually because it was carried out by a stranger, right? Evidence suggests that a lot of this actually has to do with racist biases in policing systems, which see black men in particular falsely accused of a multitude of crimes more often than any other group, especially in America. This is just another example of why our feminism needs to be intersectional and why we need to consider race in this as well, and not just gender inequalities, but racial inequalities too. Again, in this apparent 2% of false accusations, a lot of them aren't even because a woman was lying and making things up because she wanted to punish a man for no reason. It's because the police system is flawed. There is racism within the police system. This is just a fact, and other things, other flaws as well.
Following on from this, he only gets worse. He really does talk a lot about kids and young people in these books of his, and it is creepy as hell with the allegations we know around him. So remember earlier he opened his BDSM book talking about how kids should be seeing more sexual content in films? Well, this chapter is about how older people actually face discrimination because they're accused of being creepy towards young people when they act in a way which young people perceive as creepy. And that's just not fair to him. We should stop calling him creepy. This part isn't half as bad as what's to come, but for now, let's start with this. We're going through the book chronologically. Chapter 5, the oldest person in the room gets the blame. Age is supposed to be a form of credibility. That was the deal anyway. You work long enough, learn enough, weather enough bad decisions and hard years, and eventually you earn a kind of social capital that younger people cannot fake. Communities used to be organised around this logic. Elders arbitrated disputes. Seniority carried weight. The long view was a resource, not a liability. Kind of yes and no. It wasn't the age was a form of credibility, but more the experience was a form of credibility, So, for example, I trust someone who's been working in a certain field for X amount of years. I trust that they know more than someone who's been working there for a month, And it could be that this person is 20 and this person's 36, but if this one's got more experience, I'm going to listen to them. You know what I mean? So, anyway, this isn't relevant to what Onision goes on to talk nonsense about, though. This is the main bit. Watch what happens to that logic the moment an accusation enters the room. The transformation is quick and it is rarely announced. Nobody states it plainly. Nobody stands up and says, I believe this person is guilty in part because they are older. What happens instead is subtler and in some ways more insidious than a blunt declaration of prejudice. Age becomes atmospheric evidence, not formal evidence, not testimony, not a document or a fact or a forensic exhibit. Just a tonal signal that bends the room towards a conclusion before anyone has examined the facts. The accused is described as the older examiner executive, the much older boyfriend, the elderly father who is not all there. None of those phrases are accusations by themselves, but they arrive doing the same work an accusation does. They preload the audience with a frame, and in that frame, the story has already cast its villain. This is ageism meeting accusation culture, and the intersection it creates destroys lives so routinely and so quietly that the culture has essentially decided not to discuss it. Mate, this isn't ageism, it's just a fact. Like, in a sexual situation, in a relationship, in a sexual situation mostly, a much older person can often create a power imbalance, and it's not because of their age, it's because of what comes with that age. And obviously with a power imbalance comes a lack of ability to consent from the party with less power. So he's clearly talking about and trying to downplay the allegations of grooming against him. Onision has had a string of much, much, much younger partners. The youngest, I believe, was just 14. Sorry, he met when she was just 14 and she moved in with him when he was in his 30s. And there is documented evidence of him gaining the trust of these young people and waiting until they were of legal age to make a physical sexual move, or traveling to a state with them where the age of consent was lower so that he could be with them, which is also illegal, but he did it anyway. People find this creepy and predatory because there was clearly a power imbalance in his favor in all these situations. There is an argument to be made for grooming in a number of those situations. He's gonna claim that pointing this out is ageism, and I'm just gonna say he's a creepy idiot. It's not ageism. We don't point out the age difference out of a prejudice against older people. We do it because we know that with age comes a host of other factors. You have more money, more status, more influence, more authority. You have more experience. Younger people, when next to that older person, may not have the wealth of knowledge required to notice if they're being manipulated or mistreated or coerced into something. They may not have the financial resources to leave the relationship if they want to, and therefore they don't have the freedom of choice. They don't have the freedom to actually consent. These can all be massive issues. Is every age difference wrong? No, of course not. I feel like, a 35-year-old and a 45-year-old is a lot, like, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You're in similar stages of life, similar resources, everything's good. But a 15-year-old and a 25-year-old, same age gap, creepy as hell, for all the reasons mentioned before. I think we can all agree that some age gaps, so for example, a 30-something-year-old man and a teenager, that is inherently imbalanced and therefore predatory and creepy. The next part would be laughable if it wasn't so gross. So Onision has regularly been called creepy, and in my opinion it's completely warranted, but it's hilarious because he writes this: "The word creepy deserves special attention here, because it is perhaps the most precisely targeted weapon available for age-based reputational destruction. It carries no evidentiary content whatsoever. It describes not an action, but a feeling, not a fact, but a vibe. It cannot be cross-examined, it cannot be falsified, it cannot be placed on a timeline or verified against a record. Yet it functions as an accusation with genuine social weight, particularly when attached to an older person, because the cultural script around aging and sexuality is already loaded. An older person who expresses romantic interest, tells an off-color joke, maintains an extended conversation, or misreads a social signal gets the creepy label in a way a younger person performing identical behavior often does not." Sorry, but an older person expressing romantic interest is never labeled creepy as long as they're doing it towards someone appropriate, someone age appropriate, and so on. You know what I mean? Anyway, he complains some more. Let's move on. The next chapter we're going to look at is chapter 11, The Grooming Trap. This one's bad. He opens this chapter with a very valid discussion around why the phrase grooming was initially introduced, and how it's to describe how most child sexual abuse was not perpetrated by strangers, it was perpetrated by known adults. Adults with access, adults who had methodically built that access over time, and who had investigated considerable patience and calculation in making sure that by the time sexual abuse began, a child's protective network had already been dismantled from the inside out. What behavioral analysts like Kenneth Lanning identified in his work for the FBI was not a single act, but a process, a deliberate sequence pattern, identifying a vulnerable child, building trust through attention and gifts, isolating them from protective relationships, normalizing physical contact progressively, installing secrecy, and managing surrounding adults to preserve access. The term grooming did real work. It explained why abused children often didn't fight back, why they protected their abusers, why disclosures came late or ambivalently, or not at all. Before this framework existed, defense attorneys had a great job understanding victim credibility by pointing at that ambivalence. Grooming gave courts a language to explain the ambivalence as evidence of the process itself rather than evidence against the child. Great, we love this. All absolutely fair, right? I think everyone here can acknowledge that grooming is a very serious problem, and it's good that it's got a definition and it's now starting to be understood more. However, what Onision both does and does not acknowledge is that the definition has expanded since then. He does acknowledge that it has, but he argues that it shouldn't have. So Safeline, a charity which focuses on preventing and surviving sexual abuse, says of grooming, sexual grooming is when someone builds trust with another person to abuse or exploit them sexually while hiding their intentions. Grooming can happen to children and adults, making the abuse hard to notice and stop. This is the currently accepted definition of the word, and it does include the fact that grooming can be done to adults. That is very important. This is what we now acknowledge. This is just a fact. They then go on to give more details, including grooming is a way that abusers prepare someone for sexual abuse. They may choose someone they see as vulnerable, spend time alone with them and separate them from others, gain trust with the person and those around them like family or colleagues, slowly introduce sexual ideas, language or touch, and after abuse try to keep the person silent or make it easier to continue abusing them. For children, experts describe 5 stages of grooming: choosing the child, isolating them, building trust, desensitizing them to sexual content, and using strategies to maintain control after abuse. Adults may experience similar behaviors, often using emotional manipulation, flattery, or dependence to gain control. Many grooming behaviors look like normal caring actions. For example, giving gifts, spending time together, or giving compliments may seem innocent, but can be part of grooming if the person's intentions are sexual. Studies show that people often only realize grooming happened after abuse has occurred. Behaviors that might be warning signs include isolation, physical contact, sexualized language, or exposure to sexual content. So experts in this field acknowledge that anyone can be groomed. It is simply a matter of manipulating someone in certain ways to prepare them for some form of sexual abuse. Often this does happen to kids by adults, but it can also happen to young people with much older people, inexperienced employees and their bosses, people with older or estranged family members, people with physical or mental disabilities, and people that are perhaps meant to be caring for them, elderly people and their carers, or any other number of circumstances. The UK law even states adults can be prosecuted for grooming other adults in certain circumstances, particularly where there is exploitation, abuse of trust, or coercion. And that's really important to remember. So this is a criminal offence, at least in the UK, and the grooming of adults is a very real and recognised problem. However, Onision refuses to recognise this, and he instead complains of the term grooming. It is now applied to consenting adult relationships with age disparities, deployed in post-breakup narratives between fully employed, legally independent adults in their mid-20s and early 40s, used to describe relationships where both parties met as adults, dated openly, and ended things when priorities diverged. The label no longer requires a minor, no institutional dependency, no systematic isolation, no documented desensitization, no progressive sexualization of a child who lacked the legal and emotional capacity to understand what was happening. It only requires an age difference and someone willing to retrofit a narrative after the fact. It's almost like it's a pattern of behavior that defines the grooming and not just the people involved, right? Isn't that crazy? Can't believe he's complaining about this. Right, I'm gonna have to go take a break and rest my throat because I'm struggling, but I'll be back to film the rest later. Okay, lovely people, I've taken a break, I've rested my voice, I've had some cold and flu tablets, and I'm back. Where were we? Okay, so at this point in the book, Onision tells a fictional story about an older, established, financially secure man. Again, too many C's and S's in there for me. It's and a younger, less certain woman. He acknowledges that there is a significant difference in power that they hold, but when the woman claims what happened was grooming, Onision argues, and again, remember this is all fictional, but based on, I guess, like his personal experiences, we could extrapolate, I guess, if we're using our brains. Anyway, Onision argues the truth doesn't matter as a concept because the word grooming doesn't function as an allegation in the same way most allegations do, except it does. Most allegations are falsifiable. They make specific claims about specific acts at specific times in specific places. That's what an allegation of grooming is. Let's be real. Those claims can be checked, so can a claim of grooming. But grooming as applied to adult relationships is an allegation about an atmosphere, about intent over time, about the invisible architecture of influence. You cannot subpoena an atmosphere. There is no flight record that contradicts a dynamic. Except there is, as I've said in this video before, an objective definition of grooming. It's not based on an atmosphere. It's based on a series of acts with intention, and I feel like he's just creating a straw man fallacy here, and it doesn't make any sense. He then provides another hypothetical, which interestingly mirrors a lot of what we know about Onision's relationship with the 14-year-old, at least in my opinion. And please remind me if, so it's been years since all the allegations came out, and while I've done a little bit of research again and looked into them, I can't quite remember all the details of every allegation and every case. So if I'm getting anything wrong or you see patterns or connections that I've missed, please tell me down in the comments. Because I obviously didn't have time to watch 40 hours of videos on this, but I've done what I could and remembering what I can. But if, like I say, if I get anything wrong, please tell me. So this is his hypothetical. Consider the specific situation where an adult, prior to the association in question, showed zero interest in the other party while the party was a minor. Not just passive disinterest, active disinterest, documented distance, rudeness even. A clean, consistent, verifiable record of an adult who had every opportunity and made absolutely no move because the other person was not an adult, along with possibly other reasons as well. Then, when that person becomes an adult, the dynamic shifts. Less hostility exists. This is the textbook opposite of grooming. Grooming is a systemic building of trust with a minor, or a minor's environment, with the intention of facilitating future sexual acts. The clinical and legal definitions across child protection literature converge on this consistently. It is a predatory process directed at children. The defining feature is that the minor is the target during the targeting phase. The whole architecture of the behavior involves treating the child as the object of interest while they are still not an adult. An adult who clearly, demonstrably, and in some cases even rudely rejected a minor's presence or attention, and who then became warmer once the person is a legal adult, has done the one thing the child protection framework actually asks of adults in proximity to young people. They correctly identified a line and did not cross it. The line moved because the other person aged across it. That's not predation. Again, in the context of Onision, it just feels dodgy, doesn't it? Onision claims that he was just friendly with the 14-year-old child in question when she was a child, and that it only became sexual when she was legally of age, to the best of my memory. Like, isn't that the textbook definition of grooming? Building trust with someone when they're still a child, isolating from their family and friends, which Onision and his spouse did, spending lots of time alone with the child. The spouse in particular used sexual jokes around the child, was partly or fully undressed around the child at various times. There was emotional manipulation and control of the child on both their parts, especially Onision. And his whole thing of saying well, I rejected her, I was mean to her. The way I think a lot of people read into that was he was kind of goading her a bit and making her want it more and trying to be there was still emotional manipulation going on there. And then when the child legally became an adult, turning that relationship sexual and then trying to get her to keep quiet about it afterwards. Textbook definition of grooming, right? If we take what allegedly happened, textbook grooming. Onision thinks because he never technically did anything sexual before she was 18, this can't be abuse. But this is literally why the definition of grooming exists, because we know that with this kind of sexual abuse, it starts before the first touch even happens. It starts the moment the emotional manipulation happens, the moment the isolation happens. And this started when this child was 14, allegedly. The fact this is his only defense is kind of pathetic. And if you can even believe it, the book only gets worse from here. His next section argues that if young people's brains aren't developed enough to be given the death penalty or consent to sex, then why should we believe them when they're sexually assaulted? This is actually disgusting. So let me read you a short selection of extracts. I'm not intentionally leaving anything out here, it's just a very long section. I'm trying to cut around the waffle and speed things up because this video is already long enough. I know that. I've been filming it. In 2005, the United States Supreme Court banned the death penalty for crimes committed while under 18. In 2010, it banned life without parole for non-homicide juvenile offences. In 2012, it struck down mandatory life without parole for any juvenile homicide. Across all three decisions, the court leaned on the same body of neuroscience. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's machinery for impulse control, consequence evaluation, and long-term planning, is not fully developed in adolescence. Young people are different from adults in ways that matter morally. They are more impulsive, more susceptible to peer influence, less capable of weighing distant consequences, and more likely to act from emotion than calculation. Therefore, the harshest punishments were disproportionate. The science was used to extend mercy, and the reasoning was sound. Absolutely. I think that's all fair, right? Now ask yourself, when have you ever seen that same body of research applied in the other direction? When a minor accuses an adult, nobody stands up and says, wait, let's consider the accuser's susceptibility to peer influence. This actually makes me angry to read. Their impulsivity under emotional arousal, their tendency to underestimate consequences, their documented vulnerability to social contagion. Nobody. The developmental science that the Supreme Court found constitutionally relevant for sentencing purposes evaporates completely the moment it might complicate the cultural posture that a young person's perception is uniquely trustworthy. This is worse than victim blaming, right? Does Greg not realize that when kids make these kinds of accusations, people who are trained to work with them have to first establish that a child knows the difference between a truth and a lie? They check that they haven't been coerced into saying anything. There's whole interview processes in place to make sure they haven't been pressured by anyone to say something which isn't true, or they haven't been coached or goaded into it, right? That is actually something which is considered in great detail. The fact he doesn't know this is concerning, and the fact he's like, well, if we can't put them on death row, then why should we believe them when they say they were abused, is just, that's not a normal thing to consider. This man does not care about kids, and the fact that he has kids and is a parent makes what he's saying here so much more terrifying. This worries me. This really, really bothers me. He goes on to argue, paraphrasing here, sure, teen brains might not be fully developed, but they can still lie, and therefore we should never believe them, which is just sickening in the context of talking about victims of sexual abuse, isn't it? This is why so many predators get away with it, because people think that teenagers are inherently untrustworthy, or we can't trust, well, that's the same thing. You know what I'm trying to say. He writes, adolescent brains showed heightened striatal. How do I actually say that word out loud? Sorry. This is such a problem I have when I'm making videos, because I spend so much time reading, and you read these words, you look them up, you know what they mean, there's all this, and then you come to say them out loud, and you're like, I don't actually know how to do this. Anyway, the activity, meaning reward signals hit harder and more immediately. This combines with less developed inhibitory control, to produce what developmental research has described as a motivational system that prioritizes present rewards over future consequences, and susceptibility to peer influence that measurably increases risk-taking in social settings compared to solitary ones. What the research does not say is that adolescents are incapable of planning, incapable of deliberate deception, incapable of calculating how to harm someone, incapable of sustaining a fabricated story under pressure. Yeah, and they're also capable of telling the truth and being abused, and that's what we should care about more. Those would be extraordinary claims that the science does not support. What is actually established is something narrower and more honest. Adolescent judgment is far more variable than adult judgment, more socially contingent, and more likely to fail under certain specific conditions. And what point does he want to make with this? Well, he'd like to complain about the legal ages of consent and marriage because they're arbitrary and not really based on science. Again, this stuff angers me. He writes, marriage law varies significantly by state, with some jurisdictions still allowing 16 or 17-year-olds to marry under defined pathways, which is a massive problem I have. It's even younger in some countries. I've done a lot of fundraising in the past for charities like Forward, which they do incredible work. They work to prevent and help survivors of child marriage and also female genital mutilation, and the work they do is absolutely incredible. I don't think people realize how prevalent child marriage still is around the world, including in the United States, and these people really help the victims of that and help try and make sure they have a life afterwards or prevent it from happening to them in the first place. They're great. Onision doesn't have a problem with this, obviously, but if you would like to go and support Forward, I'll leave a link in the video description, and literally anything you can donate goes to a really, really amazing cause. Not saying you have to, but it's there if it's something that you care about as well and can afford to give. Please don't ever give more than you can, obviously. Where are we at? Okay, age of consent ranges from 14 to 18 depending on geography, with no single scientific threshold endorsed by any international medical body as the biological truth. If the biological reality of adolescent brain development dictated these laws, the number would be the same everywhere. It is not. It is a series of cultural and political compromises dressed up with the language of developmental protection. That is fine, societies make compromises. What is not fine is pretending those compromises are carved from pure science while applying them with stunning inconsistency depending on who is accused of what. Ugh. I hate to say this, but in some ways he's right. If it was purely based on science, it would be the same everywhere, right? The problem is that science can't decide exactly where that line is and can't decide where that line is for every individual. Therefore, social and cultural norms have to come into play too. There's also different factors to consider. For example, is the age of consent referring to the age a person can consent to being intimate with another person their age or another person significantly older? Because I personally would argue they need different legal requirements, essentially. People will be ready for different things at different times. And while I would argue a 16-year-old exploring their sexuality with another 16-year-old is completely fine and they are developed enough to do that, a 16-year-old exploring their sexuality with someone in their 20s is not fine. And that risks a lot of power imbalance there and potentially the younger person getting very hurt. Again, you also have to take into consideration that every individual ages and matures at very different rates. And biology alone can't dictate what that is. A person may be physically mature, have maybe physically hit puberty, but their brain might not be developed to a certain level of emotional maturity. And even then, even if their brain is developed to a certain level, that doesn't mean they have the social experiences necessary. So it's very, very, just look at myself as an example, right? Plenty of kids get their period as young as 8 or 9 9 years old. They might be biologically like going through puberty, but that absolutely does not mean that physically in other ways they are ready, that they are emotionally ready, that their brain is developed. That's absolutely not. Whereas for me, I didn't get my period until I was like 16, which is nearly 17, which is very, very old in the grand scheme of things. So you could argue that biologically, in terms of puberty, I was at the same spot at 16, 17 as this 8 or 9-year-old, but that doesn't mean we had the same levels of physical or emotional maturity. So you can't just rely on one factor, is what I'm saying. There's other things with, like, you know, two 16-year-olds who might be physically the same, might have different emotional development, different maturity levels, different social experiences. So, for example, at 16, I'd been working for 2 years already. Other 16-year-olds might be very sheltered and just stay at home and rely on their parents all the time. Different life experiences like influence things in different ways. So my point is, in some ways, there's little slivers in which Onision is kind of right. We can't just look at physical and biological characteristics, and we can't just assume that everyone matures at the same rate, and we can't just assume that there's the same line for everyone when they're ready for something like sexual activity or where it's appropriate for them. That's not going to be the same for everyone. But where I disagree with Onision is that this is where age of consent laws matter, and they should be higher than is maybe necessary for some people in order to protect the minority who aren't yet there, you know? Onision is saying this stuff to imply that age of consent laws are silly and impractical and not based on science, so he can make the argument of like, well, even if I took this teenager across state lines to have sex with them because it's legal there and not in this state, it's because those laws are arbitrary and that makes it okay. I personally decided this child was mature enough, so it's fine. That's his argument, and it's sickening and gross. I think a thing that people like Onision forget is that when we talk about age of consent laws, they are there. How do I put this into words? I've said it before, but I'm trying to find the right wording. They're there for young people to say, like, okay, legally at this age, you're allowed, or we think you're mature enough to start experimenting and discovering your sexuality with other people your own age. You know, a 16-year-old and a 16-year-old, or a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old, whatever. That's absolutely fine. They're not there for grown adults who are so much more mature and developed and have more experience to take advantage of them. A 30-something-year-old going after a 16-year-old might technically be legal, but it's morally not okay, and it's going to harm that teenager. Like, it's just a fact. And personally, I would say we need to readdress the laws and look at them and maybe add some more stipulations in there, but that's something that it's complicated and would require a lot of discussion, but I think it's something that honestly needs to be done, because you have creeps like this who take advantage of kids when those, like, stipulations aren't there. I don't know. Okay, right. I guess the difference is that Onision is saying, if it's 14 here and 18 here, then why isn't 14 okay everywhere? It's just arbitrary. But for me, I'd say, if it's 14 here and 18 here, then why isn't it 18 everywhere in order to protect more kids? I think that's the difference in our opinions. And also, right, why are we even arguing about this? I'm a 33-year-old woman. Like, age of consent laws don't affect me, other than caring about kids, obviously. But, like, Onision's like 40. Why is he so bothered about what the ages of consent are? He shouldn't be anywhere near kids that age for it to matter. Do you know what I mean? Like, he should only be involved with adults his own age. So whether it's 14 in this state and 18 in this state, like, that shouldn't matter to him, because he needs to stay away from those kids regardless, right? Like, I hate it, right? Stop it. Bothers me. Like, as a 33-year-old, I've never had to think, like, when I've like met a new partner or something, like, oh, is this legal? Oh, like, do I need to go here to make that? No, of course not, because I date people my own age. Like, the fact that Onision even has to consider this, and he's had this history of like, well, I'll take them to this state to make it legal here and this state. Like, that is creepy as hell. That is creepy as hell. I'm gonna keep saying it. Allegedly. That was creepy. Anyway, while he's on this, well, technically, the definition, blah, 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 rant, he decides to cover paedophilia in this as well. Yay! He writes, oh god, I can't believe I'm making a video on this. So gross. Paedophile has a clinical definition. The DSM-5 TR is specific. Paedophilic disorder requires recurrent, intense sexual arousal directed at prepubescent children, generally 13 or younger, present for at least 6 months, with the person being at least 16 years old and at least 5 years older than the child who is the object of those urges. The diagnosis additionally requires that the person has acted on those urges or experiences significant distress or functional impairment as a result of them. The clinical precision exists precisely because the condition causes catastrophic harm to specific vulnerable people, and identifying it correctly matters in life-altering ways. Yeah, absolutely. Definitions do matter. Being precise does matter in some situations. There's other words with definitions relating to attraction to other specific ages. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's one for like very young children, one for like older teenagers, and so on like that. But we also have to acknowledge that colloquially, paedophile is just generally used in a very casual way to refer to anyone who's attracted to children, just in general, right? We can get more technical and exact if we want in clinical settings, in legal settings, and it will be necessary to do that in these settings, but in a casual setting, I think it's okay to just use the generic term of paedophile, because we all know what it means. We don't need to narrow it down to an exact age group if we don't want. Just, I think casually it's fine. But he complains about the definition of grooming again, and then he says, paedophile still carries the full psychological Oh yeah, it's detonation. I thought it was denotation. No, it's detonation. Okay, never mind. Paedophile still carries the full psychological detonation of the clinical term. It's just no longer doing the precision work that detonation was meant to serve. Is he trying to write denotation, or does he actually mean detonation? I'm not sure actually. Okay. It now lands on target. Sorry, it now lands on targets it was never designed to reach, while losing none of its capacity to destroy them. I guess it could mean detonation for that. Okay. The reason the misfired label works is not rational, it's psychological, and that is precisely what makes it so effective as a weapon. Yeah. When you point out that someone has been inappropriate with kids, it's a weapon, right? And not a warning to others. Ridiculous. Anyway, his whole underlying implied message here is that he's not technically a paedophile because the kid he allegedly groomed was 14 and not 13, therefore he's not technically a paedophile. Technically. Therefore, anyone using that word is technically incorrect and just using it as a weapon against him. Okay, I guess we can respect his wishes and not use the P word anymore. I guess we'll just use something more generic, colloquial, casual. Let's just call him a nonce, because he is. Allegedly. Next up, let's ease up on the talking about kids for a bit, finally, and instead discuss how hard Onision had it facing accusations as a famous person. Mate, if Onision's famous, I'm the Queen of England. The public mindset has a particular way of processing a famous person's fall. It processes it like a verdict. The accusation arrives, the cultural machinery convulses, and the institutional responses stack up, and within a week, the person's professional existence has been effectively dismantled. Wish that was true. At this point, most people file the case away under what happened and move on to the next outrage cycle. The legal system, meanwhile, is still looking for its car keys. It will spend the next several years holding hearings, weighing evidence, examining witnesses, deliberating, appealing, retrying, and sometimes arriving at conclusions that look nothing like the cultural story filed away in the first week. By then, nobody's paying attention with the same heat. The first story wins by default, not accuracy. I think there's an argument to be made that this is fair, but I would also argue that I think at this point, people are more invested in following whole court cases and seeing what happens. Look at the Depp Heard case, the Lively Baldoni case, the Ruby Frankie trial, and so on. People followed those throughout the whole case and looked at individual bits of evidence and testimony and cared about the outcomes. And so I think legal verdicts do matter to a lot of people, especially online these days. He then tries to make this argument, and this is long, but I'll give you a summary at the end, okay? YouTube's partner program ties creator earnings directly to engagement metrics, primarily views, watch time, and the signals the algorithm uses to determine whether content deserves wider distribution. The platform's own documentation is clear that watch time is a primary signal for discovery. An allegation video against a recognizable name, edited to maximize the emotional intensity of the claim and tilted to hit the strongest possible arousal note, performs exceptionally against those metrics. It generates initial volume from the target's existing audience. He's talking about himself here. He's talking about all the YouTubers that spoke about his allegations, obviously, right? It generates reaction content from the opposing side. It generates commentary analysis and extends discourse that all link back to the original. Every piece of that secondary and tertiary content produces more watch time for more creators. All of it monetized, all of it feeding the same algorithmic loop that rewards high engagement material with broader distribution. The platform profits recursively and infinitely. First, the original accusation content, then the outrage reaction videos, then from the meta-commentary analysing the outrage, then from the correction if one arrives, and from the discourse about whether the correction was sufficient, whether it was sincere, whether the person who was accused responded appropriately, whether their allies handled it correctly, blah, 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 blah. Every layer is monetizable, which is hilarious considering Onision's monetizing this, or was before he took it down when we found it. Conflict has legs, clarity is a revenue drop. The cancel economy deserves to be understood as exactly that, an economy, not just a cultural phenomenon, but an exchange mechanism with measurable inputs and outputs. When a serious public accusation lands against a recognizable person, the social capital transfer is often immediate. The accuser may gain followers, media invitations, speaking opportunities, and a moral identity as the person who said the thing nobody else would say, sometimes within 48 hours of the original post. In that same window, the accused frequently loses employment, professional relationships, speaking platforms, and in some cases housing stability, because housing depends on employment and employment depends on reputational trust more than anyone acknowledges until they lose it. Again, pretty sure he's talking about himself here. The transfer happens before any evidence has been formally weighed, before any legal record has been established, before the accused has had a realistic opportunity to respond in context that receives anywhere near the same attention. So in summary, sorry, I know that was a lot, he's trying to claim that people only talk about allegations against famous people like himself to make money and get attention and status, and that this is just awful for the poor person accused who has their life ruined without proof. Meanwhile, people are just making money off their downfall like horrible, horrible monsters, which seems plausible until you realize the minute you talk about something serious like sex crimes on YouTube, especially against children, your video gets immediately demonetized and therefore suppressed in the algorithm. There's not money to be made off talking about this stuff. I'm pretty sure this video will get demonetized because I've used the P word, the R word, I'm just going to say again, pedophile and rape. Pretty sure that will be an instant demonetization for me. Just saying. To give you a few examples from my own channel that I could think of, when I spoke about the I'm Alex domestic violence situation, immediately age restricted and demonetized. When I spoke about a trad wife who got groomed by her now husband, demonetized. When I spoke about Predator Jimmy Savile, demonetized. I'm putting the screenshots on screen so you can see this right now. Chances are, like I say, this video likely won't make any money, but I still think it's important to talk about and educate people and warn them and try and keep them safe. This isn't about money or status or anything like that. It's just about trying to educate people. Meanwhile, you've still got like predators and dangerous creators out there, allegedly, like Jeffree Star and James Charles and countless others who are literally making millions of dollars. So Onision is literally talking out of his bum. And let's be real, right? Onision has lost his audience. And I think a part of that is because of the allegations against him. But I also don't think that's the only thing. People knew this stuff for years and they did keep watching him and they did keep making him money. I think more influential was that he lost his audience because he's a boring content creator, he's an all-around crappy person, he's got no talent, and he's stuck in the past. Plenty of predatory people carry on and make millions. Look at Chris Brown. He's an absolute monster. I'll say it. I've made a video on him before. He still has a massive fan base and makes millions of dollars because sadly, he's still talented. He's still got that, superficial charisma and talent and people like his music. So he's still making money and he's still got a job. And yet he is a dangerous, violent predator. Someone like Onision doesn't actually have the talent or the charisma or any skills to fall back on. And that's why his career's over. The last thing Onision talks about is how we shouldn't believe all victims, his words, which is ridiculous because he spent so long going on about the technicalities of language. I think he's had a little Freudian slip here. I think what Onision wants us to take away from this is actually don't believe all accusers, but instead of accusers, he said victims, because I think he doesn't want us to believe actual victims because that benefits him, you know? And let's be real, we all know that we should be believing victims, right? Because they're a victim, why would we not believe them? Sometimes accusers might lie, yeah, but if you're an actual victim, you're not lying because you're a victim. That's how you get the label victim. Anyway, Onision doesn't want us believing his alleged victims, so I feel like this slipped through the cracks and he's really telling on himself here. He goes on to say this. According to RAINN, 1 out of every 10 rape victims in the United States is a male. Researchers at 1 in 6 cited by RAINN estimate that at least 1 in 6 men have experienced sexual abuse or assault at some point in their lives, whether in childhood or as adults. And note that male survivors are significantly less likely than women to acknowledge or report what happened to them. Early National Institute of Justice and CDC survey data estimates that approximately 2.78 million American men had been victims of attempted or completed rape. And in regards to the sexual assault stats, it's interesting that he was happy to get his 10% of victims every year are men from the RAINN website, but he didn't take his lifetime stats from them, because what RAINN actually says is 1 in 6 US women has experienced attempted or completed rape in her lifetime, and only 1 in 33 men has experienced attempted or completed rape, and that's about 3% of US men. So I did look up that 1 in 6 stat though, and I looked at their website and where it was coming from, and it turns out that's describing any kind of sexual assault against men, and it is shocking. So it's not talking about rapes and attempted rapes. It's talking about any kind of sexual assault. That could be something as small as like being groped in a club, or something a lot more serious like an attempted rape. Obviously none of them are good, but I'm just saying it's a slightly different definition. So obviously that 1 in 6 stat, awful, shocking, absolutely. What Onision fails to add is that it's as high as almost 1 in 2 for women, with the Institute of Health suggesting that between 44 and 50% of all women in America have had some kind of sexual assault occur against them. So while that 1 in 6 is bad for men, it's still 3 times worse for women. It's appalling. He goes on to complain about how these numbers for men are awfully high. Of course they are, I agree. And that they are not taken as seriously as rape against women because women get all the resources and help and people talking about it, and how it's just not fair on men. He then goes on to say, this is the part where some people want to argue that male victimization, while real, is less common, and therefore the resource disparity is proportionate. That would be my argument, sorry. But the disparity is not proportionate to the numbers. It's substantially larger, and it reflects something other than a neutral calculation about relative frequency. It reflects a cultural assumption about who is legible as a victim and who is not. I will agree there is some truth in that bit, and also this next bit, and I think there is something to be done about it. He says, men and boys who suffer in silence are not doing so because they are naturally stoic. They are doing so inside an institutional and cultural environment that has not built sufficient space for them to do anything else. The shame they carry is not purely internal. It is a deposit made by society that spent decades constructing victimhood as a category that looked like something other than them. So I do agree with that, and I do think we need to acknowledge the need for services for both male and female victims. However, proportionally there are more female victims, so they do just need more resources. It's like the toilet argument, isn't it? A lot of venues provide 50-50 male and female toilets in terms of space, but women take longer. Women have, because it simply takes longer for women to go, women have more needs, like having to change tampons or change babies, which is why they spend longer in the toilets. So giving 50-50 when women don't need more than 50% of the time in the loos creates a disparity and unfairness. It's the same with this. If you give 50-50 resources to men and women, it's not fair because women need the resources more. There are more women who need this, so you need to give women more to make it actually equal. Does that make sense? It's an equality versus equity thing. I don't know. I'm rambling. It's late at night. Sorry. Okay. I also feel like what he's not acknowledging here is that a lot of the issues which cause men to stay silent after rape are some of the same ones which cause women to as well. So the problem here is the stigma that all victims of sexual assault face, and that's something we should absolutely be combating. And the way to do that is not by writing books like this about how all victims are just attention-seeking liars. That doesn't help male or female victims at all. He can't pretend to care about male victims while writing a book like this. It's hypocritical. He then goes on to talk about some typical manosphere talking points. Men commit suicide more, older white males are the most at risk from accusations and therefore have the worst mental health because those accusations must be false, and so they're the real victims in the world. Poor old white men. White men in middle and older age sit in some of the most dangerous statistical territory in the whole American suicide landscape. This is not a political observation, it is a mortality fact, and any honest conversation about the consequence of public reputational destruction has to put that fact on the table before everything else, because consequences do not distribute evenly across people with different baseline fragility. I'm sorry, but you can't be like, hey, don't speak about this man who sexually assaulted you because he's just fragile and he might kill himself. I'm so sorry, but like, if he's assaulted you, you should be able to speak about it. Like, sorry, okay. When you build a system that punishes people socially without process and destroys livelihoods without trial, that's not what happens. The worst of what that system produces lands hardest on the people who are already least equipped to absorb it. He's so close to getting it, isn't he? And yet he still thinks old white men are the victims. I know. He then goes on to talk about how false accusers usually target the richest people they can, who usually happen to be older white men. So, oh no, yeah, victims again, and the ones who are famous, like himself apparently. The favoured target will be chosen until the cost of choosing him becomes visible to the people who are, however indirectly, doing the choosing. Such a word salad. The visibility starts with being honest about who is actually bearing the weight of a system that punishes before it thinks, before it knows, and forgives itself before the body is even cold. He then goes on to spend pages and pages moaning about how power imbalance isn't a real thing. I know. An age difference between two consenting adults of equal professional standing, where neither holds formal authority over the other's employment, education, treatment, or advancement, is not a coercive structure in the legal sense. Being older is not the same as holding institutional leverage. A fame differential between two adults choosing independently in a social setting is not a formal power structure. One person being more recognizable does not give them authority over the other person's livelihood, education, legal status, or professional future. Celebrity is a form of status. It is not a form of institutional control. None of this says that all asymmetrical adult relationships are equally healthy, equally wise, or equally free of complexity. They're not. A significant age gap between adults can create psychological dynamics that deserve honest examination. A notable status gap can affect how freely someone feels they can choose to say no. None of that is false. The question is whether those dynamics rise to the level of a formal coercive architecture, the kind that makes consent legally or ethically compromised in the specific way that professional ethics codes and harassment laws respond to, and the honest answer in most cases involving equal standing adults is no. A bad relationship is not automatically coercion, a significant age gap is not automatically exploitation, a regretted decision is not automatically evidence that the decision was made under duress. Emotional inequality between two free adults is real, worth taking seriously in personal terms, and not the same as structural authority over another person's life. And so he just ends this book with trying to say, sure, this can be a problem, but it's not defined as illegal, so I'm going to say you're stupid for worrying about it. And then he just tries to play off a lot of abusive behavior as just a bad relationship. And sorry, but no. Like, a bad relationship is like, oh, we bickered a lot, we had nothing in common, we had no chemistry, we didn't get on with each other's friends, we didn't share the same hobbies. An abusive relationship is like, he isolated from my friends and coerced me into sex. Rape. Like, or potentially in Onision's case, I was having a mental breakdown, so he shaved my head and put me on camera in front of the world. He didn't like my family, so he isolated me from everyone, tried to lock me in a basement, groomed me from the age of 14. Again, those are not just bad relationship behaviors, they're abuse. But anyway, that's all I have to say about that mess of a book. Let's move on to the very final book. And this section is going to be short because there's not a lot to say about it, but this is his poetry book. This is going to be quick because it's stupid, it's juvenile, it's just pathetic. I can't believe he even put this out into the world. I know a lot of you were expecting from me like an in-depth poetry analysis about this, but really there's nothing of substance to analyse, so we're just going to go over it quickly. It's just a poorly executed attempt of a 12-year-old boy's sense of humour in poetry form. This is Poems of Onision's Pain, which you may have noticed spells out, if you look at the first letters of each word, spells out poop. And this is literally the only joke repeated over and over again for like 150 pages. The dedication reads, "To my former photography and journalism teacher, your outstanding understanding helped alter viewpoints, eventually awakening honest opinions towards authentic storytelling success." Oh yeah, so you're a 40-year-old man writing a dedication to tell your former teacher they have a hot bum. How mature. How original. Like, again, look at the first letters. All his poems are like this, but somehow worse, because he has this constant fascination with feces throughout the book. I wish I was joking. Quite frankly, it's a little concerning. A grown man should not be thinking of excrement this much. It's not healthy. Here's a poem which spells out bum eating, and it's about getting crap on your face. Literally. I won't read it out in case some of you are eating right now, but I will pop it on screen. There's also images in this book, which I can't tell if they're AI generated or not, but knowing Onision, it wouldn't surprise me if they are. This one is of a cartoon person playing in poop and eating it. The excrement theme continues with other poems, reading things like diarrhea in your mouth, I pooped my pants again, but more sweary, and eat my poop, also sweary. And there's more examples, but I won't read them all out because they're gross. Again, I repeat, this isn't normal. Having such a fascination with feces isn't normal. It's not funny, it's just gross and a little concerning. A lot of these feel like attempts at early 2000s/2010s Tumblr era jokes, and yet they still wouldn't have been funny back then. It's like they're trying to be that, but without actually any of the skill to pull it off. He tries to kick back at YouTubers who talk about him with poems like this, which read down the side, YouTubers are morons, of course. And then, of course, there's his whole, oh, poor me nonsense with go F yourself. Oh no, in this poem he has bad thoughts and he wants us to go F ourselves. Like, some of these lines, it's ridiculous. Got a squatter in my skull, won't leave. Only thing it pays in, grief. 40,000 thoughts a day, most junk. Ugly ones go VIP while the rest get shrunk. Criticism fires the same path as a punch. Kid, you knew, still ate it for lunch. Your survival code stopped updating in caves. Old wiring treats a harsh text like grenades. Under pressure, the self-talk becomes prosecution. Rejection is physical. Brain scans killed that illusion. Sitting alone too long, scariest room you'll find. Everyone's worst bully is in their own mind. Loudest voice in your head hides behind your own teeth. Face it, the tenant is just you, deep underneath. So he has bad thoughts and he wants to say go F yourself. Also, like, AI's clearly written these, right? Like, each one is just a word salad of nonsense, so they're not even worth talking about, but this one I just found really pathetic. The childishness continues with poems spelling out stuff like, got your mum pregnant? Even the spelling of your as you are just screams how much Greg is stuck in the past. Like, we haven't written or spoken or text like that since the 2000s where we were paying per character, you know? Grow up. And speaking of living in the past, of course he has to have a pathetic I'm a banana reference too. I can't imagine what it must have been like to peak in life with something like the Banana Song, which is not even mediocre, and yet that's his peak. God, I'd hate my life if that was me. Also, like a teenage boy, he has a weird obsession with penises and lesbians and sex workers, but in the least respectful way possible. We have things like this, which spells out lesbian tongues. Like, ha ha ha, wow, how edgy. Yeah, you're a 40-year-old man, lesbians exist, like, and sometimes have sex with each other. It's a normal, lovely part of life. Get over it. It's not the punchline of a joke, you know. Oh my god, on some of these lines. Lizards shoot projectile tongues outward fast. Like, is that meant to be an oral sex joke? Because it's not funny or smart. It's just dumb. This next one is called Subscribers Paradox and spells out OnlyFans sluts. Yeah, let's not with the sex worker shaming and name calling, please. Let's just not. This one actually has a couple of interesting concepts worth discussing in the lines, like loneliness taxed at $20, that's a fact. You think it's intimacy, but it's an act. That could actually be an interesting thing to like explore in a poem and look at how and why people pay for this kind of fake intimacy online and things like that. But it's all undermined by the blatant misogyny against sex workers in general. It's just stupid. And this isn't the only example he's got where he calls women misogynistic names. There's good slut, effing hot sluts, F you bitch. Can we just not? There were more as well, but again, I don't really want to read them out. And then he reverts back to being an immature idiot with these two, which just spell out words for vagina and penis. So, yeah. There's this one called Baby Carrot, which spells out 6-inch penis. It's just immature, but I'm pretty sure this last one here is in response to some internet rumor that he had a tiny penis or something, so he's kicking back with this, or he's fighting back, being like, no, excuse me, it's a perfectly average size, thank you. Okay. Good brag. We all know you're mediocre, Greg, in every way. Actually, he's not even mediocre, is he? Let's be honest. Talentless, creepy groomer, allegedly. Same with this one, which spells out throbbing penis. Okay, cool. Thumping rhythms skip a beat unexpectedly. Hearts flutter when anxiety meets. Organ misfires, create skipped repeats. I'm assuming that's an erection and ejaculation reference and joke, but again, it's not clever, it's not funny. Like, I feel like maybe if he'd put some effort into making the words the acrostic spell have a little more to do with the content of the lines, it could have had a vague sense of humour to it, but as it stands, nah. Oh, actually, no, I lied. This one has some vague effort in that regard, right? This is called Science. Looking at hips, biology runs the program. Evolution wired men to scan for breeding signs. Ovaries fertile trigger prehistoric chemical diagram. Natural selection carved attraction into male design. So you can see it's all like word slop again, but there is a theme to this, right? This one is about trying to find an appropriate mate to breed with, and how this should definitely be a young woman, because DNA doesn't care about modern social norms. Childbearing years peak, then for some, attraction nosedives. Ew. And of course, this one spells out Leonardo DiCaprio, who is notoriously creepy for only dating women considerably younger than him and under 25. Apparently, according to Greg, it's not a preference, just genetics acting viciously. Sure. Or you're just all creeps. Finally, this all ties into his obsession with the past and his ability to stop obsessing over old YouTubers he used to have connections with, as he has these poems which spell out Shane Dawson eats dogs and Jacqueline Glenn is a fraud. He's obsessed with Jacqueline, isn't he? Can he not just leave her alone now? Like, she's married, she's got kids, she's happy, she's doing great. Just drop it already. Like, he just can't move on, can he? He's been so creepy for years about Jacqueline in particular. It's just pathetic. Anyway, that's all I really have to say about this nonsense of a poetry book, if you can even call it that. I will also say, though, if you do like poetry, another little bit of shameless promotion here at the end, and you would like to read something by someone who actually bothered to put time and effort into their work and doesn't use AI at all, then I have two of my own poetry books available. My first is a short collection of poetry and photography called Reflections on Healing, and my second is a bigger project. It's called Outside. It's a gorgeous 300-page hardback, which is a collection of poems, essays, photography, and paintings. And if you buy the hardback, you get a link to a free audiobook version, which you can download as well. Or if you just want a cheap version in general, it is available as an ebook as well. Links for both are down in the video description if you want to check them out. But if you prefer listening to reading, then I am currently working on my very first spoken word poetry album, which it's going really well. It's still in the editing process, but I'm really, really proud of it. And that will be out soon. It's got some of my older poems. It's got some new ones songs I've written just for the album, and it's a mixture of funny, sentimental, sad, happy, hopeful, a little bit of kind of righteous anger in there about the political state of the world today, and it's a little bit of everything. So if you want to keep an eye out for that, subscribe to my channel, go follow me on Instagram as well at Rachel Oates with a 0 instead of an O, and you can keep up to date on all the things I'm working on there. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. I understand this was really long, but thank you so much for coming on this journey with me and looking at these Onision books. And yeah, let's rip them apart together in the comments, right? Tell me what you think. Tell me if you saw any references to his real life behavior that I missed. Tell me what you think he was trying to say with all of this. Tell me if you agree or disagree with him. Yeah, let me know, leave a comment. And for now, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience. And I'll see you guys again really, really soon.